By midsummer, every garden in Mercy Creek had collapsed beneath a white, merciless sky. Every garden, except the one townspeople had watched a stubborn widow bury in clay. Elena Varela's beans still climbed green poles while dust buried her neighbors' fences. Beneath those vines, 100 hidden jars released their secret, one drop at a time. But the jars had nearly ruined Elena before they saved anyone at all. 4 months earlier, Elena stood alone beside a wagon loaded with red clay vessels. Her late husband's farm stretched behind her, bare as an old kitchen table. Thomas had died beneath a falling cottonwood during the previous autumn's first storm. He left 20 acres, 2 mules, and a mortgage due after harvest. He also left Elena a promise that the farm would someday feed children. Mercy Creek, New Mexico Territory, survived through a narrow community irrigation ditch. The ditch carried mountain water past 12 farms before reaching Elena's thirsty ground. Its first gate belonged to Gideon Pike, the valley's wealthiest cattleman and lender. Gideon measured every neighbor's water because drought could destroy his herd and fortune. That spring, snow vanished from the western peaks 3 weeks too early. Elena noticed the exposed stone while others celebrated warm planting weather. She carried the concern to the ditch meeting inside Pike's crowded barn. Gideon scratched a water schedule across a board with a chunk of chalk. Larger farms received longer turns because, he argued, they carried greater obligations. Elena received 1 night of water every 10 days, beginning after midnight. "That will not hold vegetables through July," she said from the doorway. Gideon answered that widows could not expect the valley to finance their experiments. Several men studied their boots, while a few gave quiet, uncomfortable laughs. Elena folded her schedule once and placed it carefully inside her coat. "I asked for fairness, Gideon, not charity," she replied before leaving. Outside, the warm wind carried dust where spring grass should have grown. Elena understood then that ordinary furrows would drink more than her share allowed. She also understood that selling the farm would break Thomas's final promise. The answer waited in her pottery shed beneath a canvas stained with rain. There stood 12 round jars Elena had shaped during the long winter evenings. They had narrow mouths, swollen bellies, and walls fired deliberately below tableware heat. Elena's father had used similar vessels beside peach trees farther south. He buried them near roots, filled them, and covered each opening with stone. Their porous walls surrendered moisture slowly whenever surrounding soil became dry. Wet earth accepted little, but thirsty roots pulled steadily from the buried clay. Elena had dismissed the method as old-fashioned when Thomas still managed the ditch. Now the memory felt less like tradition and more like a lifeline. She carried 1 jar outside and chose a patch beside 2 bean seeds. The hole swallowed its round body, but left the narrow mouth visible. Elena poured in water, covered the mouth, and marked the level with twine. Beside it, she planted 2 more beans watered by an ordinary shallow furrow. For 6 days, both pairs pushed green hooks through the soil. On the 7th afternoon, the furrowed seedlings folded beneath the heat. The beans beside the jar remained upright, and tiny roots embraced its damp wall. Elena smiled for the first time since the cottonwood had fallen. 1 jar proved possibility, but 100 demanded clay, fuel, labor, and money. She sold Thomas's silver watch to the storekeeper for $38. The watch had survived war, marriage, and every harvest they shared. Elena kept its empty chain because surrendering every memory felt too much. She bought cornmeal, lamp oil, and enough firewood for 3 careful firings. Then she hauled red clay from a bank beyond the northern ridge. Each load bent the wagon springs and left her palms split open. 12-year-old Samuel Reed watched from the neighboring farm's broken rail fence. His mother, Ruth, had struggled alone since fever took Samuel's father. "Are you making water pots or cannonballs?" Samuel asked through a missing tooth. Elena handed him a lump of clay and told him to decide. Samuel returned the next morning and learned to turn the wooden wheel. His first jar leaned so badly that Elena named it the Mayor. Samuel laughed, then worked until his second vessel stood nearly straight. Together they shaped clay until rows of round bodies filled the shed. Travelers slowed their wagons to stare at Elena's growing army of pots. At the general store, someone called her field Mercy Creek's Grand Cemetery. Another man asked whether she planned to bury the entire town standing upright. The jokes spread faster after Elena began digging measured holes across her land. Every hole stood several feet from the next along carefully marked planting beds. Gideon rode over after counting 20 empty pits from the road. His expensive bay horse stopped beside Elena's mud-spattered mule and snorted. "People say grief has turned your farm into a graveyard," Gideon said. Elena kept digging until her spade struck the depth marked on its handle. "People confuse anything below their sight with death," she answered. Gideon warned that her mortgage would not disappear beneath 100 flower pots. He offered $60 for her best 5 acres beside the ditch. Elena knew those acres carried the farm's deepest soil and only young orchard. Selling them might save the house while killing every chance of recovery. "Ask again after harvest," she said, though fear tightened her voice. Gideon tipped his hat, certain the answer would become cheaper by summer. Elena fired the first large batch while an evening wind shook the shed. She fed the kiln slowly, judging heat by color through a narrow opening. Orange deepened toward yellow, and Elena worried the fire had climbed too high. A sudden gust strengthened the draft before she could close the lower vent. By dawn, 30 jars cooled beneath a coat of pale ash. None had cracked, and their smooth ringing sound seemed like success. Elena buried them between rows of corn, beans, squash, onions, and peppers. Samuel filled each narrow mouth while Elena planted seeds around their hidden bellies. Flat stones kept sunlight, mice, and thirsty insects away from the water. The remaining jars emerged from gentler firings and made duller sounds when tapped. By late April, exactly 100 clay mouths dotted Elena's planted ground. From the road, the field resembled a buried village of tiny chimneys. Ruth brought biscuits and quietly asked whether the system truly worked. Elena showed her the first jar's fine halo of dark, cool earth. She explained that covered water could not vanish quickly beneath sun and wind. Roots would take moisture where they needed it, without flooding empty soil. Ruth touched the damp ground, then looked toward her own dusty vegetable beds. "If it works in June, teach me," she said before walking home. Spring moved forward with cloudless mornings and winds that smelled of hot stone. Elena's first irrigation turn arrived beneath a moon as thin as wire. She opened her gate at midnight and guided ditch water into a holding basin. From there, buckets and short channels carried water directly toward every jar. The vessels swallowed slowly, forcing Elena to work until sunrise with aching shoulders. Yet the surrounding ground remained firm, instead of becoming a wasteful, muddy sheet. 10 days later, green rows appeared where neighbors expected only weeds and pottery. Bean leaves spread beside corn shoots, and squash shaded the spaces between. Elena planted those companions together so every patch served more than one purpose. The corn offered height, beans climbed it, and squash protected the soil. Even Gideon's foreman slowed his horse when passing the unexpectedly green field. The first proof brought visitors, though most arrived pretending they needed directions. Elena lifted one stone and showed water resting inside the shadowed neck. A farmer named Owen dipped one finger and tasted it like medicine. "You buried water instead of crops," he said, finally understanding half the idea. Elena corrected him gently, saying she had buried water beside living roots. Gideon arrived before the visitors left and studied the ground without dismounting. He admitted the plants looked healthy, then pointed toward gathering clouds. "Any garden thrives before summer," he said. "Let July decide." Elena wished his confidence sounded foolish, but July frightened her too. 3 mornings later, she found corn beside the kiln's first batch curling inward. Their leaves had narrowed into green blades, despite recently filled jars. Elena removed one covering stone and found water nearly touching the mouth. The vessel had released almost nothing into the powder-dry earth around it. She checked another, then another, and discovered the same terrible failure. The hottest firing had sealed 30 jars almost as tightly as glazed pitchers. Their beautiful ringing tone now sounded like 30 small bells announcing defeat. Removing them would tear roots and crush seedlings already reaching toward the clay. Leaving them meant nearly 1/3 of her field would slowly die. Elena sat against the shed wall with Thomas's empty watch chain in hand. She had sold his last valuable possession to manufacture a hidden mistake. Samuel found her there and stopped joking when he saw her face. "Did we lose them?" he asked, glancing toward the wilted corn. Elena answered honestly that she did not yet know what remained possible. Samuel picked up his crooked first jar and poured water inside it. A dark patch immediately spread across one thin, uneven side. "Mine leaks too much," he said, ashamed of his childish workmanship. Elena stared at the patch until failure revealed the shape of an answer. She weighed Samuel's jar filled with water, then waited after 1 hour. She repeated the test with vessels from every firing beside the same warm wall. The dull-sounding jars lost water steadily, while ringing jars kept nearly everything. Samuel's crooked jar emptied fastest because one side was dangerously thin. Elena now had a simple test for every vessel she would ever make, but testing future jars could not rescue 30 already buried among tender roots. That night, she drilled one narrow hole into a failed jar's shoulder. Water escaped too quickly, carving a small tunnel through loose soil. She plugged the hole with softened beeswax and pierced the wax with a needle. The new opening released a patient thread instead of a wasteful stream. Before dawn, Elena modified 6 jars without disturbing the surrounding plants. By evening, their curled corn leaves had begun opening toward the sky. She repaired the remaining failures, adjusting each wax plug by watching nearby soil. The solution cost 3 sleepless nights and a basket of broken drill bits. It also taught Elena that hidden systems still demanded visible attention. Gideon learned about the failure from a hired hand who had seen her drilling. At Sunday services, he asked whether buried pitchers now required surgery. Laughter moved through the churchyard, but this time, Elena did not retreat. She invited everyone to inspect the repaired row before judging its condition. Gideon declined, yet Owen and 3 others followed Elena home that afternoon. They saw revived corn beside darker soil no wider than a washtub. They also saw untouched dust between beds where ordinary irrigation would have flowed. Owen removed his hat and asked how hot the jars should be fired. That question mattered more to Elena than every joke she had endured. She showed them the dull tapping sound and the simple hour-long water test. Ruth listened carefully, already calculating which vegetables could feed Samuel through winter. Elena offered to make 12 jars for Ruth after finishing her own repairs. Ruth refused charity and offered sewing, eggs, and work beside the kiln. Their agreement became Mercy Creek's first trade, measured partly in saved water. May ended without a soaking rain, and cattle began crowding muddy river bends. Cottonwoods dropped pale leaves months early to preserve moisture in their trunks. Lizards sought shade before noon, and meadowlarks abandoned the open flats. Elena climbed the ridge and saw no snow remaining on the western peaks. The ditch would soon depend entirely on a shrinking spring above Gideon's ranch. She returned home and deepened the holding basin before her next water turn. Samuel lined its bottom with packed clay, while Ruth carried smooth stones. Elena roofed part of the basin with scrap boards and woven brush. The shade reduced evaporation and kept wind from lifting water into the air. She repaired every channel so not one narrow stream escaped toward useless ground. During her next turn, the ditch arrived several inches lower than before. Gideon's foreman closed her gate early, claiming the cattle trough required emergency water. Elena blocked the gate with her body until he showed the written schedule. The foreman cursed, but he reopened it for her remaining half hour. That small victory filled only 70 jars and half the shaded basin. Elena rationed the basin with a marked wooden dipper and a written count. Plants bearing food received water first, while decorative flowers went without. She even cut young fruit from overloaded branches to protect the trees themselves. Each discarded peach felt like a coin removed from her mortgage payment. Would you have trusted Elena's repaired jars after discovering 30 had failed? Share your answer and subscribe, because the real drought was only beginning. June arrived behind a wall of wind that covered Mercy Creek in dust. The sun rose copper-colored, then burned white before breakfast each morning. Ordinary furrows crusted within hours, trapping moisture beyond the reach of shallow roots. Owen's wheat yellowed first along the higher edge of his field. Ruth's uncovered cabbage wilted, but plants beside Elena's 12 jars remained firm. Samuel guarded those jars like treasure, checking every stone before school. Across the road, Elena's corn reached her waist with half the usual water. Squash leaves shaded the clay mouths, further slowing loss from the hidden reservoirs. The system did not make water, and Elena never pretended otherwise. It simply forced each precious bucket to remain where living roots could reach it. Gideon's ranch still looked prosperous because the upper ditch supplied his broad pastures, Yet his cattle cropped the grass shorter every day near the crowded troughs. He began buying hay on credit from a railroad town 2 days east. Every wagon load protected his herd while increasing the debt against his land. Fear made Gideon stricter, not crueler in his own understanding of himself. He believed saving the largest herd preserved jobs and protected Mercy Creek's economy. Families below his gate experienced that belief as empty buckets and dying gardens. At the next ditch meeting, Gideon announced that every schedule would be shortened. His ranch would receive priority until the spring recovered or summer ended. Owen protested that children could not eat cattle still standing on Pike's Range. Gideon replied that cattle could be sold, while failed gardens brought no income. Elena placed 1 green bean and 1 shriveled bean on his table. Both had received water from the same ditch during equal 10-day intervals. "The question is not only who gets water," she told the room. "The question is what happens to every cup after the gate opens." She proposed a shared kiln and enough vessels for every household garden. Gideon called it too late because clay required weeks of shaping and firing. Elena answered that waiting would only make tomorrow later than today. 6 families accepted her offer, while others feared wasting labor on strange pottery. They gathered clay at dawn before the bank became too hot to touch. Elena taught thick walls, narrow mouths, slow drying, and the dull tapping test. Ruth organized turns at the wheel, while Samuel counted every finished jar aloud. Owen rebuilt the kiln vent so sudden gusts could not overheat another firing. Their first community batch held 42 sound vessels and 4 cracked failures. Elena smashed the failed ones publicly so nobody would bury a dangerous promise. The fragments became drainage beneath the shaded basin instead of being completely wasted. Those 42 jars could protect vegetables, but not rescue acres of thirsty grain. Families chose beans, squash, onions, and medicinal herbs over less efficient crops. Sacrifice entered every planting bed long before the worst heat arrived. Near the end of June, Mercy Creek school well began drawing cloudy water. The teacher sent children home early when the pump produced only mud. Household drinking water now came from 2 deep wells near the church. Elena stopped filling 15 garden jars and reserved their share in covered barrels. Her outer pepper rows weakened, but drinking water mattered more than market income. Thomas's mortgage notice arrived that afternoon inside the mail carrier's leather bag. The bank demanded payment by September or possession of the entire farm. Elena needed every vegetable she had just chosen not to save. That evening, Gideon renewed his offer for the 5 acres beside the ditch. He raised it to $100, enough to delay foreclosure through winter. Elena walked through the orchard before answering him at her gate. Tiny, surviving peaches hung above jars whose moisture darkened circles around each trunk. Thomas had planted those trees expecting shade he would never live to see. "The price is fair," Elena admitted, surprising both Gideon and herself. Then she refused because fairness could still purchase the wrong future. Gideon warned that sentiment would not satisfy a bank or summon rain. Elena answered that neither would surrender, though she knew he might be right. The first day of July reached crushing heat before the church bell struck noon. Chickens stood with open beaks and horses crowded shadows beside silent buildings. A hot wind stripped moisture from leaves faster than roots could replace it. Elena refilled jars before sunrise, then covered their mouths with thicker, flat stones. By afternoon, Ruth arrived carrying Samuel, whose skin burned beneath his dusty shirt. He had collapsed while hauling water from the church well to their garden. Elena laid him inside her cool adobe kitchen and loosened his collar. She used drinking water from her reserved barrel to cool his neck and wrists. Samuel woke after sunset and apologized for spilling half his bucket. Elena told him no plant was worth carrying water under that sun. His collapse turned an approaching danger into something the valley could no longer debate. The next morning, Gideon's foreman found the upper wooden flume sagging over dry ground. Months without moisture had shrunk its boards and opened gaps along every seam. Water escaped in glittering curtains before ever reaching the ranch's first gate. Gideon sent men to pack the seams with cloth, clay, and fresh lumber. The repairs slowed leakage, but the weakened supports groaned beneath renewed weight. Elena climbed upstream and recognized the danger in those splintered, leaning braces. She urged Gideon to empty the flume and rebuild its middle span. He refused because closing it for 2 days might kill exhausted cattle. "Then reinforce beneath it before night," Elena said, pointing toward the bend. Thunderheads were gathering over the mountains, black at their bases but dangerously narrow. A brief storm could send a sudden surge without soaking the valley below. Gideon saw the clouds, then saw his cattle pressing against nearly empty troughs. He chose water now and ordered the foreman to reinforce the span tomorrow. That night, lightning flickered silently above the western ridge for nearly an hour. Mercy Creek received 6 large drops that vanished before touching one another. Miles upstream, rain struck bare mountain rock and rushed into the spring channel. The surge reached the weakened flume shortly before dawn with a wooden roar. Its middle support snapped, dropping 20 feet of channel onto the rocks below. Precious water spread across gravel and disappeared before reaching a single field. By sunrise, every ditch gate in Mercy Creek stood dry and useless. Gideon rode into town with splinters stuck to his sleeves and bloodied hands. Rebuilding required timber from the mill and at least 5 days of labor. 5 days in that heat could finish every remaining garden in the valley. Families gathered beside the church well, where the line reached across the square. The pastor rationed drinking water and prohibited its use on household crops. Owen pulled his last onions and watched their green tops shrivel by noon. Ruth's garden survived beside 12 jars, though every vessel was nearly empty. Elena's field still held moisture around 85 jars, and the shaded basin. Her early rationing had preserved enough water for perhaps 4 careful days. Keeping it might save her harvest, mortgage, orchard, and future in one decision. Sharing it could protect seed crops while placing her own payment at risk. Elena walked among the jars, touching each covering stone as evening shadows lengthened. Thomas had wanted the farm to feed children, not merely preserve his name. She found Gideon measuring the broken flume beside a pile of warped boards. "I can keep the community gardens alive," she told him without greeting. Gideon looked toward her green field and finally asked how the jars worked. It was not an apology, but it was the first honest question he offered. Elena explained the buried reservoirs, repaired pores, shaded basin, and careful plant choices. Then she demanded his wagons, barrels, workers, and remaining stored ranch water. Gideon hesitated because the stored water represented 1 more day for his cattle. Elena reminded him that his workers' families also stood beside failing gardens. He removed his hat and stared at the dry channel he had controlled. "Take 2 wagons," he said, "and show us where every gallon belongs." Before sunrise, Elena divided the town into crews with buckets and marked dippers. No water touched an open furrow, dusty path, or plant already beyond saving. They filled buried jars beside beans, squash, herbs, and vegetables carrying viable seed. Ruth recorded each amount while Samuel guarded workers from pouring too generously. Gideon's foreman grumbled until Samuel showed moisture spreading around one clay wall. The man knelt, pressed 2 fingers down, and silently followed the boy's instructions. Elena's remaining water reached 6 household gardens before the covered barrels ran dry. Her own outer rows received nothing, and peppers folded beneath the afternoon sun. The central beds remained green, proving conservation could stretch water but never multiply it. Meanwhile, Gideon's repair crew discovered the replacement timber would arrive 1 day late. A wagon axle had broken on the rocky road from the distant mill. The 5th day became a 6th, and the valley's final reserves vanished. Cracks opened across Ruth's unprotected soil wide enough to swallow dropped beans. Even jar-fed leaves drooped at noon, though they recovered slightly after sunset. Elena checked her basin and found only dark mud beneath the shaded boards. One final source remained, but using it could destroy the entire system. Each of her 100 jars still held a little water below its neck. Together, those hidden portions could refill the most threatened community vessels once. Emptying them would abandon Elena's roots during the hottest day yet forecast by wind. She chose 30 jars supporting mature plants likely to survive temporary thirst. Gideon's workers lifted water using narrow cups tied to willow handles. They carried it across the road to younger seed plants near collapse. 1 cup at a time, Elena sacrificed market vegetables to preserve next year's planting. Gideon watched her pepper leaves curl and understood the exact price of her help. He ordered half his cattle released toward a distant river beyond the eastern mesa. The drive would weaken them and lower their sale price, perhaps ruinously. Yet their departure freed his final trough water for Mercy Creek's food gardens. Barrels rolled from the ranch at dusk, while dust followed the departing herd. Elena rationed that water through the night beneath lanterns shielded from hot wind. Gideon carried buckets beside Owen without announcing which man owned more land. Samuel filled his crooked jar last because its thin wall released water fastest. At sunrise, the young beans beside it lifted 2 small leaves again. The replacement timber finally arrived before noon behind 4 exhausted horses. Every able worker climbed the ravine to rebuild the broken flume span. Elena remained below, guarding jars whose damp circles shrank beneath relentless heat. By sunset, hammering still echoed, but no water entered the repaired channel. Gideon worked after dark with rope around his waist above the rocks. He refused to leave until the final support stood braced against the current. Just before midnight, the foreman opened the upper gate 1 cautious inch. A silver thread entered the new flume and held above the ravine. Workers followed it downhill, listening for leaks they could repair immediately. The water reached Gideon's first gate, where he let it pass without stopping. It reached Owen's farm, Ruth's garden, and finally Elena's shaded basin. She stood ankle-deep in the cold stream as the empty basin slowly darkened. Around her, 100 clay mouths waited among plants bruised but still alive. Mercy Creek had survived the break with vegetables, seed, and dignity intact. The drought continued for 6 more weeks, but the valley no longer wasted water. Families filled buried jars at night and covered every basin against sun and wind. They planted smaller areas, protected roots, and shared counts before opening any gate. Gideon sold part of his herd and used the money to strengthen the flume. He also surrendered sole control of the schedule to an elected ditch committee. Elena accepted a seat only after Ruth agreed to serve beside her. By September, most grain had failed, and nobody pretended the valley escaped unharmed. Yet beans, squash, onions, herbs, and seed crops survived across 7 small gardens. Elena lost every pepper row she had drained to help the others. Her corn yielded less than half what Thomas had once harvested there. But the surviving produce filled wagon crates that commanded high prices after drought. Ruth added her onions, Owen added beans, and the community sold everything together. Their pooled earnings covered Elena's mortgage 3 days before the bank's deadline. She bought Thomas's silver watch back from the storekeeper before returning home. Gideon waited at her gate beside a wagon loaded with red clay. He did not offer another price for the orchard or deliver a speech. He simply removed his hat and asked her to teach his workers. Elena looked toward the field once mocked as Mercy Creek's grand cemetery. Green vines covered the hidden jars, and children gathered beans for winter supper. What people had mistaken for burial had become a quieter form of planting hope. How would you rate Elena's choice from 0 to 10 after that summer? Tell us where you are watching, and subscribe to Wild West Lifestyle for more frontier stories.